What's going on, operators, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the guidelines, regulations, do's and don'ts, and general etiquette at your local range, be it indoor or outdoor. Now, if you're a particularly new shooter who has just picked up their first firearm and looking to do some sports shooting, this video is definitely for you. But even if you're someone who's a little more seasoned, maybe you've been doing hunting for a few years, or you've been doing some pest control, but you're just getting into sports shooting and you're willing to approach a local range for membership, this might be useful to you as well, as there's a number of different ranges in Canada, of course, all over the country, and many of them have their own regulations, restrictions, and of course also rules that you need to follow. If you don't, of course, you're not going to be allowed to shoot at those ranges. So something to keep in mind. Now, of course, I can't talk about every single rule and regulation, do and don't, or whatever of every single range out there because there's so many, but we can talk about the general etiquette that you should follow and that will ensure that you're going to keep yourself and people around you safe, have a great time, and of course, just make sure that you don't break any rules so that you can continue to enjoy the range for which you're a member. Now, before we go on with that, I just want to let you know that I am working on something really cool. This is actually a 12 gauge chamber flag, which is also a keychain. I've been working on this for a little bit, and we're going to be releasing them in the CO store very soon. So if you'd like to get your hands on that, do follow the link in the description below to my Etsy shop to help the channel out. And of course, you can always use the super thanks button down below if you'd like to help support the video in a small but meaningful way. That being said, let's go ahead and get started with the video. I'll see you on my indoor range.
All right, folks. Well, welcome to my indoor range. Unfortunately for today, I wasn't able to utilize my actual indoor range that I usually go to, so you are here with me in my virtual range in my living room in Pavlov. Some of you may have seen this game before, others have not. And this is actually a really great way to show you what an indoor range looks like and talk about some of the points and things that you might encounter at a variety of these different ranges. Now, there is a, a large gun wall behind me on both sides. That's probably not something that you are going to have at your range. And if you've got that at your range, then, well, I am extremely jealous. But nevertheless, I digress. We're going to talk about some different points and things that you may encounter, whether you're someone who is new to ranges and clubs, or you are considering becoming a member of one yourself, or perhaps even just joining your friend at a local club or range. So let's go ahead and get into it one point at a time. And we're going to go ahead and get started with just signing in. And I know that sounds really boring and it's super clerical and all we want to do is just pew, but you got to sign in or equivalent. Now, for me, at my range, I have a great deal of autonomy because about 95% of our members at my range are actually also range control openers. And that means that you can basically be the safety officer at a range, and what that means is you can open a range, you can close the range, and you can be responsible for a couple of other people at the range at any given time. And so for that reason, we're able to kind of come in and then we have that autonomy where we can step in the range at any time as long as there's nothing else going on and enjoy it to our liking. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to always sign a book or whatever. Like I said, every range is going to be a little bit different. For us, it is a book. But, you know, in my previous range, for example, there was no book. It was just, I'm a member. I walk in, I say hello to the guy at the front desk, and I just walk in, you know. But the reason for that is not just so much for clerical reasons, but also it's for accountability and making sure that there's certain safety precautions that are taken, right? If you know who was where at a given time, then if anything happens, you can use that information to help things along. And so that's very important. Now, the next thing, of course, before you even come in here, and I know that you can't see it on me because, well, I'm kind of a somewhat semi-disembodied figure at the moment, but you want to always make sure that you're putting your eyes and your ears on before coming into any given range, especially when the range is hot. And we'll talk about that in a second. So before walking through these doors, you always want to make sure that you have eye protection on and that you're putting some kind of earmuffs or ear protection on as well. Now, I have a really great pair of electronic earmuffs that I really like. They let me have conversations with people inside the range in a loud environment, but they also help protect my ears from sounds like sounds of gunshots, for example. So they deafen that sound, but they also amplify the sound of voice so that when I'm talking to somebody, I don't need to yell at them. So something to keep in mind. All right, so next up, you're going to want to learn the rules of the range. So whether they're posted outside or in here, you're going to want to know what the range rules are. And those can differ dramatically between range A and range B. Now, there is going to be a lot of stuff that you'll learn in the CFSC or CRFSC, the Canadian Firearm Safety Course, or Restricted Firearm Safety Course. But ranges are businesses, and businesses are entitled to have their own rules and regulations and things that you need to do in order to be allowed to use their premises. So that's very important that before you even walk in, before you even put your eyes and ears on, that you do look at whatever the rules are, ask around, and if you have questions, of course, let people know so that you don't do something that you're not supposed to do and end up getting yourself kicked out. Okay, so one last thing that you need to know before you walk into a range is the status of that range. There's only going to be really two statuses. There's going to be the range is active or the range is not. And generally speaking, you're going to have a couple of different signs. In my particular range, we have flags. So the safety officer will put up a red flag on the wall somewhere when people are up at the benches, loading ammunition, loading firearms, and shooting. And then we also, of course, have a green flag that we'll replace on the same wall, showing that nobody is allowed in front of the ceasefire line, which will usually be very well defined at your range. And that means that you can't approach the bench, you can't touch your firearm, you can't touch any ammunition, and your firearm needs to be unloaded with the chamber facing upwards on your particular table, if you've uncased it, that is. Don't ask me what that grenade is doing there. I have absolutely no idea, but don't bring grenades to the range. No, don't do that. Okay, so we've arrived at the range, we know what the rules are, we've got our safety equipment, we've signed in, and we understand whether the range is hot or not. Well, what's next? Well, I guess we're going to start shooting, right? Well, in order to do that, of course, we've got to uncase our firearm. And here I have got a little pistol with a laser sight, and it is currently unloaded. And the reason why I've got it on my hip is because I don't have any way to simulate a case, but we're just going to go ahead and pretend that we're carrying this in a case and that we are walking into a range that is hot. That means people are up here shooting and having a good time. The flag or the light is red, and we've got our eyes and our ears on. So what we would do is we would walk up here to our bench, and generally speaking, I mean, at least at my range, I don't really have to let anybody know that I'm about to approach and unload my firearm from my case and start getting ready or whatever. And I mean, generally speaking, I do have the courtesy of letting my safety officer know, hey, I'm here, I'm about to unload my firearm from the case, and I'm going to start shooting. Again, most of the time you don't need to do that, but having that courtesy to let them know so that they're cognizant of the fact that you're about to do what you're about to do will help them to make sure that the range continues to stay safe, just in case they know something that you don't. So that's always a good thing to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and pretend that this firearm here is in a case. And in Canada, at least, this would be considered a restricted firearm, so it would need to be in a locked case, and there would need to be a trigger lock or some kind of secure locking device on the firearm. If you haven't seen that, I've made a video about it, and I'll link it up here in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Now, so we'll just pretend that this is in a case, and what's really important about taking your case and placing it on the bench and getting ready to shoot is that you're orienting your case in the direction of fire. So we're going to go ahead and just actually move this 10 meters away. And yeah, you want to make sure that it's pointing straight down. Why is this? Well, I mean, just in case any kind of freak accident happens, your firearm is already pointing in the direction which is the safest direction for you to be shooting at, which also should be, incidentally, the only direction you should be shooting at. And putting your firearm, even if it's in a case, in this direction is not ideal for those reasons, right? You want to try to be as safe as you possibly can. So do be cognizant of the direction that your firearm is pointing when you put it on the bench. And when you've opened your firearm and taken off your secure locking device, you just put it in the same direction on the bench. You can then take out your ammunition, load up your magazines, and whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and just put this back on my holster there just so I don't lose it, because it'll just despawn here. But yeah, that's going to be the next part. It's just you want to take care and making sure that you're always pointing your firearm in the safest available direction, and referencing, of course, acts and prove when you do take your firearm out. Of course, you do want to prove that it is completely safe. Generally speaking, in order to do that, I do the usual steps. Of course, point, remove, which we don't have a magazine in at the moment. We're going to observe and then verify. And then, of course, for the last part, we need to examine the bore. And in order to do that, I actually just use like a little thin strip of plastic that I just put right through here. And as long as I see it coming out the other side, then I know there's nothing in the bore. There are some guys that like to put a little bit of light, a little bit of light down here, and they look through and they can see, oh, is there a piece of light, a little bit of light coming through? Oh, the light's coming through, so I've got to be, nice and clear. The reason why I don't like doing that is because you could have a partial obstruction in your bore, which is the interior part of the barrel, and it might be maybe just a small obstruction, so it might let a certain amount of light through, but at this angle you're not really completely able to see all the way down the bore as you might, for example, if you have a bolt action, in which case you can literally just take the bolt out and look straight down the barrel, and that suffices for examining the bore, because you've literally examined the bore visually, looking all the way through the actual bore. In this case, we can't do that, so we need to have a physical way to making sure that the firearm is completely clear. And again, it's a safety concern. You want to make sure that you are keeping yourself and the people around you safe. Now, you've noticed that when I'm handling the firearm, I'm typically just keeping it on the same, I guess you would call that the y-axis. You know, we're not doing this or that. You know, we're not fondling it in any weird way where it's going to be pointing in any direction. And again, this is part of your acts and your prove. You always want to make sure that no matter what you're doing, you're pointing your firearm in the safest available direction. And the best way to actually demonstrate this is, well, I've attached a little laser sight here, as you can see. And if you pretend that this laser sight is essentially just a big pipe, a big physical pipe that's coming out of the firearm and continuing on for eternity, then, you know, you don't want that pipe to bang into anything, right? So we constantly want to be pointing that forward. And I know that that potentially can be a little bit of a difficult thing to get used to, because just by our nature, we just want to, oh, what's that? You know, and already the bore, the muzzle is pointing in a direction where it shouldn't be pointing. So the quicker you get this down, the earlier you get this down, the more your muscle memory is just going to kick in, and you're going to realize that, yeah, okay, that's fine. I've proved the firearm. Okay, let's have a look. All right, that's good. Looks good. Check the bore. All right, that's fine. And, you know, literally within a few seconds, you'll have everything done. It's just a little tricky to get used to, but I promise you, it just becomes second nature the more you do it. So learn good habits early, and then you won't have to worry about any safety issues down the road. All right, guys, so next up, let's talk about ceasefire and last string. Ceasefire is pretty obvious for most folks, but we're going to go over that very quickly. And then last string is very similar, but a little bit different. So let's just go ahead and approach the table here. We've got an unloaded firearm, and of course we'll go ahead and load up. And as far as loading is concerned, I like to make sure that I've got a good grip on my firearm, I've got a good stance, and of course I've got my sight picture and I've got my target, which I do in this case, and that is only when I start to drop the slide, if it's a pistol or just cock the firearm in general, and we'll take a few shots. And somebody yells ceasefire. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to stop shooting immediately. We're going to go ahead and unload the firearm. So we're going to be pointing in a safe direction. We're going to remove any ammunition. That includes from the chamber. We're going to go ahead and observe the chamber to make sure the chamber is clear and verify the feeding path, but we're not examining the bore at this point. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just leave the firearm unloaded with the chamber facing upwards, and we are going to step away behind the ceasefire line until such a time when we are told that it's okay to step back up in front of the ceasefire line, and at that point we can generally grab our firearm and continue to fire. Now, last string is a little bit different in that when you have your firearm, I just kind of put it in there so it didn't despawn, and you are having a good time doing your shooting, and somebody calls a last string, you're basically going to do exactly the same thing with one caveat. So I'll go ahead and take a few shots here. Last string. Okay, so at this point, we don't need to stop shooting immediately. Last string essentially means that it's like a ceasefire, but there's no emergent reason for you to stop shooting immediately. And at that point, you can actually just finish whatever is in your magazine. And then at that point, follow exactly the same procedure for ceasefire. So we'll go ahead and just take a couple more shots. All right, and we are out of ammo, so we'll go ahead and drop the mag. Again, point, remove, observe, verify, and examine. We'll leave that there, and then we'll step back again behind the ceasefire line. Whatever needs to happen will happen, and at that point we'll be instructed that we can go ahead and approach the bench again, at which point, yeah, we can go ahead and approach and load up again, hopefully not with an empty magazine. All right, fellas, so to demonstrate my next point here, I have got a really nice, fancy, let's call it a Type 81, okay? With a fixed stock. And the reason why I want to talk about this is not so much about the gun, which I'll actually just put away, but more so about the ammunition. This is 7.62 by 39, and as you can see, it has a brass case, full metal jacket with a copper jacket and a lead core inside. Very, very common ammunition in a very beautiful banana magazine, which again is quite common for these types of firearms, which generally originated from China and Eastern Europe and Russia. And those firearms were typically made to shoot not this, but, well, the same caliber, just cased in a steel case and with a steel core. So a little bit different than what we have here. Now, this has actually caught on quite a lot in North America because that ammo that is usually steel core and steel cased is a lot cheaper than this brass cased and lead core stuff that I have here. And for that reason, it's a lot more popular. People want to spend less on their ammunition, of course, and they want to be able to shoot more. And as a result, it's just easier to do that financially speaking when you have a steel cased, steel core ammo that you can buy for probably less than half the cost that you can buy this brass cased and lead core stuff. Now, the reason why you need to know that is because there's going to be some ranges which are going to have limitations on the types of ammo that you can shoot. For example, my range, there is a limit in the indoor range to only pistol caliber. That has nothing to do with this because this is a rifle caliber, but it's something that you should know if your range has the same kind of restrictions. But with respect to this, it's a lot more common to have restrictions on the construction of the actual projectile. Not so much about the actual case here, but the fact that you've got a steel core. And the reason for that is because some ranges are just not equipped with a powerful enough backstop to stop the penetration, giggity, of that steel core round going downrange and into that backstop. For that reason, a lot of ranges have completely banned these types, well, not this, but the steel core version of this, of ammunition, and that is why you have to be very cognizant, because if you are using those kinds of ammo, you can cause damage to the backstop, or potentially if something goes awry, you can cause damage to other parts of the range as well. All right, fellas, so next up, and my last point here is going to be with respect to muzzle devices, and I've got this beautiful rifle here chambered in 7.62 by 51. Make sure that is nice and clear, and I'm actually going to go ahead and grab it this way. The reason for this is because it'll help me to illustrate my point. I would never recommend anyone to actually hold the rifle like this anywhere, but again, we're in a safe virtual environment here, so this is how I'm going to be able to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So here we've got a muzzle brake, B-R-A-K-E, and this is a very common device with firearms such as this. Either your DMR, designated marksman rifle, or precision rifle, they typically will have these types of muzzle brakes, and the reason for that is, generally speaking, they are chambered in larger calibers and they produce a little bit more recoil than your typical 5.56 or 22, and it does help in that regard. But how does it do that? Well, what it does is it's got these ports on the side, so this is the left and this is the right side, and as you can see, it's solid on the top and the bottom, and this differs a little bit in design from that of a typical A2 birdcage flash hider in that these slots are a lot bigger. So what happens when you fire a bullet, right, is you've got a bunch of gases that are building up in the system there, and they are all going to be traveling up through the chamber, through the barrel and the bore, and they're going to want to get out as soon as possible. Part of what causes a lot of this recoil that you feel, if not mostly what causes that recoil, is the fact that these gases need to escape, and they're escaping that way. Well, I mean, if you're shooting that way, right? So if you're holding it like this and you are pulling the trigger, these gases are going all the way down the bore and they're going straight out. And without these holes on the side, they really don't have a lot of space to expand and leave the muzzle. For that reason, they all have to push their way out from that front little hole there, which is generally about the same diameter as your bullet, in this case 7.62 by 51. And yeah, you're going to be getting a lot of that pushback in the form of recoil, and with recoil, you also get muzzle rise, right? Now, that might not be that big of a deal if you're a bench rest shooter and you've got a bipod and maybe you're prone or whatever, but it does contribute to a lot of recoil and a lot of muzzle rise, right? So what this does is it allows those gases to escape from the side. It allows those gases to expand a lot faster. And as a result of that, there's not so many gases that then need to escape from this little hole here from the top, right? And as a result of that, because you have fewer gases that are moving in that direction, you've got less power pushing the firearm back, and of course you also have less recoil as a result of that and less muzzle rise. Now, you might think that this is a really great thing to have, and really it is. I love muzzle brakes, and everything that I have in my safe that can take a muzzle brake has a muzzle brake. But with great power comes great responsibility, and you have to manage your expectations and that of others when you're at the range and you're using a firearm with the muzzle brake. And what I mean by that is if you have somebody who's standing next to you, even if you have a nice big chunky divider like this, they are absolutely going to feel that, because that explosion of gas is going every which way. Well, I mean, to the side at least. It's going to the left, it's going to the right, and they're going to be able to hear that, but they're also going to feel it, even if they have a divider like this. Now, these look pretty chunky, but generally speaking, I would set up here instead of there, just out of courtesy for the person that is shooting there, because I know that even though we have these dividers, they're definitely going to be able to hear and feel it, and it's just very unpleasant to deal with. So if you have a firearm that has a muzzle brake, just keep your neighbors in mind. They'll really thank you for it, and you might actually make a friend instead of losing one.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you found the video helpful and enjoyable, as always. And if you have anything that I've missed, make sure to share that down in the comments below. Do make sure to become a subscriber here on the channel with notifications turned on so that you don't miss my future content. If you'd like to continue the conversation afterwards, of course, you can always join our Discord linked below. And if you'd like to help our channel in a small but meaningful way, beyond, of course, becoming a subscriber and sharing and liking the video, you can, of course, use the super thanks button down below to buy me a beverage of your choice, or perhaps check out our Etsy shop, which will be getting some new additions very, very soon. That being said, thanks once again for watching. I really do appreciate your patronage and hope to see you in the next video. Until then, happy shooting.